Hi, it's Doug. Shh. Do you hear that? When I was young, I would hear this sound at night, especially in the summertime when it was hot during the night. And in my house, we sometimes would have our windows open. I got curious what this sound was. I asked my older siblings, and they said, "Oh, that's just the sound of nighttime." What do you think it is? My siblings told me that this sound was just the sound of nighttime, but that didn't really make sense to me. After all, if you hear a sound, there has to be something making that sound, right? There's not just a nighttime sound. Like, maybe it was a bird. So I asked my dad. He said, "Good thinking. You're absolutely right. Sounds always do come from something." But in this case, my dad told me that this was the sound of crickets making little chirping noises at night. It turns out they make that sound by vibrating their wings together. Here's an actual video of one. Watch this. You see that? But one night, during springtime, I heard a new sound. This. I knew this couldn't just be the sound of springtime. Something had to be making that sound. It was off in the distance. It sounded like it was coming from the swamp at the edge of the woods behind our neighborhood. So I asked my dad what it was. He said, "This time, I don't know what it is, but let's go find out." I was surprised, and to be honest with you, a little scared. I said to my dad, "But it's nighttime. It's dark out. You want to go in the woods? By the swamp?" My dad said, "Sure. Don't worry. You've got me. Grab a flashlight, and let's go check it out." So we did. We went to have a look. We followed our ears, and sure enough, the sound was coming from the swamp. I shone my flashlight out over the water. At first, I didn't see anything. Wherever the sound was coming from, it was really well hidden. But then I saw something. Two little spots shining back at me through the dark. I took a closer look at the shining spots, and I could just make out an outline. They were two eyes barely sticking out above the water. Those eyes were unmistakable. It was a frog. Now that makes sense, I thought. Frogs like to live near the water, like in a swamp. But don't frogs say ribbit? This frog clearly didn't. It made a high, trilling noise instead, like this. To find out more, I decided I'd try to catch it. With my dad's help, we caught the frog and put it in a bucket so that we could see it better. It looked like this. It was reddish-brown with rough, warty skin, dark blotches, and a light stripe down its back. We had a book about frogs, so I could look up what kind it was. I learned that this one was called an American toad. Toad is the name we use for the types of frogs that have rough, warty skin. I released the toad back into the swamp, and after that day, I started to hear even more American toads, all making the same sound from the swamp. They would get really loud at night. They sounded like this. Listening to all those frogs, I wondered, why are frogs so noisy? Why do they make sounds? Do you have any ideas? Scientists who study frogs have figured out that frog sounds are how they communicate with one another, similar to how people talk to each other. Now, what would frogs be saying to each other? Scientists were curious about that. One clue they discovered is that it's only the male frogs who make loud sounds. They're calling out to the female frogs to let female frogs know where they are. You see, once a female chooses a male, they'll lay eggs together. Each one of these is a frog egg. These eggs all hatch into tadpoles a few weeks later. So the sound of the frogs at night is the sound of the male frogs calling to female frogs to let them know it's time to lay eggs. But now listen to this. This is the sound from a real pond, taken at nighttime during egg-laying season for frogs. Notice how you didn't just hear one kind of frog sound. You can actually hear lots of different frog sounds. That's because different kinds of frogs have different sounds. Some, like this American toad, make a trilling noise. But other frogs, like this American bullfrog, make a low rumbling noise. American bullfrogs are the largest frogs in North America. They're so big that they sometimes catch and eat mice. Or check out this one. It's called a pig frog. The pig frog gets its name because the noise it makes sounds so much like a pig. Here's another. This is the gray tree frog. The gray tree frog has large, sticky toe pads that help it cling to the leaves and tree bark. Now, this might surprise you, but there's actually only one frog that makes a ribbit sound. It's called the Pacific chorus frog. I didn't have these growing up in Illinois, but I can hear them here in California where I live now. Scientists have studied the sounds that frogs make, and they figured out that each kind of frog has its own unique call. That means that when frogs are calling, they're only calling to frogs of their same kind or species. When a Pacific chorus frog says ribbit, it's only calling to other Pacific chorus frogs, not to American toads or other frogs. Having their own unique call makes it a lot easier for frogs of the same species to hear each other through all that noise. The different calls that frogs make can also be really useful for scientists. Imagine if you were a scientist and you were trying to figure out how many different species of frogs there were in a pond. What could you do?